I laid two maps side by side on my desk. The first one, published in 1851 by John Tallis in London. It's labeled Independent Tartary. Covers the territory from the Caspian Sea to Lake Balkhash. Shows the ancient Silk Route. The Kanates of Khiva, Kokand, and Bukhara. Detailed caravan routes. Cities like Samarkand and Bokhara marked clearly. 3 decorative vignettes showing Tartars on journeys, horseback bride chases, Tartar campsites. It's beautiful. Elaborate. The kind of map you'd frame. The second one, published in 1885 by G. W. and C. B. Colton in New York, shows the exact same territory, same geographic area, same mountains, same rivers, same cities. But the word Tartary is gone, completely, erased. In its place, the map shows Turkestan, Mongolia, Manchuria, political divisions of the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire, 34 years. That's how long it took for a name that had appeared on maps for 6 centuries to disappear completely, not updated, not refined, erased. And when I started looking at what else happened between 1851 and 1885, I found something disturbing. The name didn't just fade away because cartographers learned more about the region. It was deliberately removed, systematically, by the same people who were conquering the territory militarily. The erasure of Tartary from maps wasn't a cartographic correction. It was a political operation, and it happened so fast that by 1900 nobody even questioned it. Let me show you how they did it. The 1851 Tallis map isn't unique. If you look at European atlases from the 1500s through the 1850s, you'll see the same pattern. Maps consistently label a massive swath of Central and Northern Asia as Tartary or Tartaria. Abraham Ortelius published the first dedicated map of Tartary in 1570. His Theatrum Orbis Terrarum shows Tartaria extending from the Volga River and Caspian Sea in the west all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the east. From Persia and India in the south up to the Arctic Ocean in the north, John Carey published maps of Mongolian and independent Tartary in 1806. John Thomson did the same in 1814. These weren't obscure cartographers. They were the leading publishers of the Edinburgh School of Cartography. Their maps defined European geographic knowledge in the early 19th century. The name appeared everywhere. French maps called it Grande Tartarie. German maps used Tartare. Russian maps labeled it Tartaria. English maps said Great Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Independent Tartary, Muscovite Tartary. These weren't vague notations for unknown lands. The maps showed cities, trade routes, political boundaries. The map makers distinguished between different regions. Chinese Tartary to the east, Independent Tartary in the center, Russian Tartary to the north. By the 1850s, European knowledge of this region was extensive. Russian explorers and Orientalist scholars had conducted in-depth studies. Jesuit missionaries in China had sent back detailed reports. The Silk Route had been documented for centuries. Yet every map, every atlas, every geographic survey continued using the name Tartary. Not because cartographers didn't know better, because that's what the territory was called. And then, suddenly, within one generation, the name vanished. Not gradually, not through slow refinement, but systematically, completely. As if someone had decided it needed to be erased from geographic memory. Let me show you what was happening on the ground while this was happening on the maps. In 1847, Russia founded Fort Kopal southeast of Lake Balkhash. In 1852, they crossed the Ili River. In 1854, they built Fort Verneuil, which became Almaty. At the same time, they were advancing southeast up the Sir Darya River. In 1859, they took Julik from the Khanate of Kokand. In 1862, they captured Suzak. In June 1864, they took Hazrat-i Turkestan. By October 1864, Russian forces appeared before Tashkent. It was the largest city in the region. The inhabitants offered to submit to the Emir of Bokhara for protection. The Emir sent troops. It didn't matter. In July 1867, Russia created a new administrative unit called the Province of Turkestan, headquarters in Tashkent, General Kaufman as governor. In May 1868, Kaufman's forces defeated the Bukharan army at Chupan Ata and took Samarkand. The city that had been the center of Tamerlane's empire, one of the great cities of the Silk Route, fell without resistance. By 1873, they had conquered Khiva. By the 1880s, they controlled everything labeled as independent Tartary on the 1851 maps. And as they conquered, they renamed. The territory that had been called Tartary for 600 years became Russian Turkestan, the province of Turkestan, the Turkestan military district, the governor generalship of Turkestan, not Tartary, Turkestan, as if the old name had never existed. The timing is what disturbed me. Look at the cartographic record. John Tallis published his atlas in 1851, the Illustrated Atlas and Modern History of the World. His maps were regarded as the last bastion of English decorative cartography in the 19th century. The map of independent Tartary showed the region before Russian conquest. It depicted the Khanate of Khiva, the Khanate of Kokand, the Emirate of Bukhara, independent polities. The territory was labeled Tartaria. Now look at S.A. Mitchell's 1853 map. Russia in Asia and Tartary. Still shows Tartary, still uses the old name, but you can see Russian territory expanding. Jump to the 1860s, maps start hedging. They label regions as Turkestan or independent Tartary, as if the cartographers can't decide which name to use, or as if they're transitioning, preparing readers for the change. By the 1870s, the shift accelerates. Russian maps from this period show Russian Turkestan. They've dropped Tartary entirely. European maps follow suit. The name that had been standard for centuries simply disappears from new publications. And by 1885, the transformation is complete. The GW and CB Colton map of Central Asia shows no trace of Tartary. The entire region is divided between the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire, labeled as Turkestan, Mongolia, Manchuria, Siberia. 34 years. From universal recognition to total erasure. That's not normal cartographic evolution. That's systematic replacement. But here's what really bothered me. It wasn't just maps that changed. The encyclopedias changed too. The geographic textbooks, the atlases used in schools, the official government surveys. I found references to Tartary in the 1771 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Extensive entries, detailed descriptions of the region, the peoples, the cities, the geography. By the early 20th century, those entries were gone, replaced with entries on Turkestan, Mongolia, Manchuria, the new political divisions, the territories under Russian and Chinese control. The language changed. Tartary had been a geographic designation, a name for a vast region of Asia. Turkestan was a political designation. It meant the land of the Turks. It emphasized ethnicity and Russian imperial control. Same land, different name, different meaning, different ownership. And the shift happened so smoothly, so completely, that by 1900, most people didn't even know Tartary had existed. If you mentioned it, they thought you were talking about some mythical land from medieval legends. The erasure was so thorough that the absence went unnoticed. Nobody asked where the name went. Nobody questioned why maps that had used Tartary for centuries suddenly switched to completely different terminology. It just happened, and everyone accepted it. Let me show you what they replaced it with. The 1885 Colton map divides the old Tartary territory into specific regions, each with a new name, each with a political designation tied to imperial control. Turkestan covered what had been independent Tartary, the Khanates of Central Asia, now part of the Russian Empire, subdivided into the Turkestan military district. Governor General reporting to St. Petersburg, Siberia covered what had been Russian Tartary, the vast northern territories, again part of the Russian Empire, divided into administrative oblasts. Mongolia covered what had been part of Chinese Tartary, under Qing dynasty control, but the name emphasized ethnic identity rather than geographic continuity. Manchuria covered the northeastern territories, also part of the Qing Empire, named after the Manchu people, political and ethnic designation rather than geographic. Every new name emphasized either imperial ownership or ethnic categorization. None of them acknowledged the old geographic unity, the fact that this had been one continuous region, one name, one identity. Instead, the maps fractured it, divided it, assigned pieces to different empires, different ethnic groups, different administrative structures, and in doing so, they erased the memory that it had ever been anything else. I started looking at who was making these decisions. The Russian Geographical Society, founded in 1845. St. Petersburg, under direct patronage of the Tsar. By the 1850s, the society was conducting extensive surveys of Central Asia, sending explorers, documenting trade routes, mapping territories. All of this was presented as scientific research, geographic knowledge for its own sake. But look at the timing. The Society's most intensive work in Central Asia happened during the exact years Russia was conducting military campaigns to conquer the region. The explorers were military officers. The surveyors were army engineers. The scientific expeditions were reconnaissance missions, and the maps they produced showed Russian territorial claims, not neutral geographic information, not local names and traditional boundaries, Russian administrative divisions, Russian place names, Russian political control. The same thing was happening with European cartographers. They relied on Russian sources for their information about Central Asia. Because Russia controlled access to the region, Russian officials decided what information got shared, what names appeared on maps, what political boundaries were recognized. So when Russian maps stopped using Tartary and started using Turkestan, European maps followed. Not because the cartographers independently verified the change, but because their Russian sources no longer provided information labeled as Tartary. The name disappeared from maps because the people controlling the territory wanted it to disappear, and they controlled the information that cartographers used to make their maps. Look at the language in the maps themselves. The 1851 Tallis map describes the region as independent Tartary. That word independent is crucial. It meant the territory was not under Russian or Chinese control. It existed outside imperial administration. The Khanates of Khiva, Kokand, and Bukhara were shown as separate polities, with their own borders, their own rulers, their own political identity. But by the 1870s, that independence was gone. The Khanates had been conquered, absorbed into the Russian Empire, and the maps reflected this change by removing the word independent and replacing Tartary with Russian Turkestan. It wasn't just a name change, it was a statement of political control. Turkestan belonged to Russia. It was no longer independent. It was no longer Tartary. And the cartographers made this explicit. Russian maps from the 1870s and 1880s show clear boundaries. The Russian Empire in one color, the Chinese Empire in another. Everything labeled according to which empire controlled it. No more geographic designations. No more traditional names. Everything defined by political ownership. And if a territory didn't fit neatly into Russian or Chinese imperial categories, it got subdivided, given multiple names, broken into ethnic regions. The unity was destroyed, both on the ground and on the maps. I found something else in the cartographic record. Something about how they dealt with the cities. Samarkand, Bokhara, Khiva. These cities had been marked on maps for centuries. Trade centers on the Silk Route, cultural and political capitals of the region. On the 1851 Tallis map, they're shown as independent cities, major urban centers in independent Tartary. The map gives them prominence, shows their connection to trade routes, their importance to the region. But on Russian maps from the 1870s and 1880s, something changes. The cities are still there, but they're no longer shown as capitals of independent Khanates. They're provincial cities in Russian Turkestan, administrative centers under Russian governors. Same cities, different context, different political identity, and the maps reflect this by changing how they're labeled. Instead of Bokhara, capital of the emirate, the later maps show Bukhara, Samarkand Oblast, Russian Turkestan. The cities didn't move, but their identity on the map completely changed, from independent centers of power to subordinate administrative units in an imperial system. And this happened for every major city in the region. Tashkent became the capital of Russian Turkestan, designated as such on the maps, given prominence as the seat of Russian administration, while the old capitals of the Khanats were demoted, reduced to secondary cities in a Russian provincial system. The cartography rewrote the political hierarchy, not just the names. But here's the question that kept bothering me. Why was it so important to erase the name? Russia could have conquered the territory and kept calling it Tartary. They could have labeled it Russian Tartary, just like they had with Siberia, or Russian-controlled Tartary. Instead, they chose to remove the name entirely, replace it with something new, something that had no connection to the old geographic designation. Why? I think it's because the name Tartary represented something they wanted to eliminate. Not just political independence, but cultural memory, historical continuity, the idea that this region had existed as a coherent entity before Russian control. By changing the name to Turkestan, they were making a statement. This land was always Turkish, always Turkic peoples, always part of the Turkic world. And Russia was bringing order to a fragmented region, uniting disparate tribes under imperial administration. The name Tartary suggested something different. It suggested a unified region with its own identity, its own history, its own political structure. And that contradicted the narrative Russia wanted to tell, the narrative that Central Asia was primitive, fragmented, and in need of Russian civilization. So they erased the name. And with it, they erased the memory of what the region had been before conquest. The speed of the erasure is what disturbs me most. Think about how long Tartary had been on maps. Abraham Ortelius first mapped it in 1570. That's 281 years before the 1851 Tallis map. Nearly 3 centuries of consistent use, generation after generation of cartographers using the same name for the same region. Then, in just 34 years, from 1851 to 1885, it vanished. Completely. From every atlas, every geography textbook, every official map. That's not organic change. That's not gradual refinement of geographic knowledge. That's systematic removal. And it required coordination. Russian cartographers had to stop using the name. European cartographers had to follow suit. Publishers had to update their atlases. Schools had to replace their textbooks. Government agencies had to revise their official maps. All of this happened simultaneously, across multiple countries, multiple languages, multiple institutions. Someone was directing this change, making sure it happened uniformly, making sure the old name was completely replaced, and they succeeded. By 1900, Tartary was gone, not just from new maps, but from memory, from geographic consciousness, from the way people understood Central Asian geography. The erasure was so complete that when conspiracy theorists started talking about Tartary in the 21st century, mainstream historians dismissed it as fantasy, as if the name had never existed, as if centuries of maps showing Tartary were somehow fabrications. But the maps are real, the name was real, and the erasure was deliberate. I started looking at what else disappeared at the same time, the traditional political structures. The Khanates of Khiva, Kokand, and Bukhara had ruled the region for centuries. They had diplomatic relations with other states, treaties with neighbors, internal administrative systems. After Russian conquest, all of that was dismantled. The Khans were either deposed or turned into puppet rulers. Their courts were dissolved, their armies disbanded, their administrative systems replaced with Russian imperial bureaucracy. The maps reflected this. Pre-conquest maps showed the Khanates as sovereign states with clear boundaries, political legitimacy. Post-conquest maps showed Russian administrative divisions, oblasts and governorships, military districts. The traditional trade routes changed too. The Silk Route had connected the region to the wider world for millennia. Trade flowed through Samarkand, Bokhara, and Khiva. Merchants traveled from China to Persia to the Ottoman Empire. But Russian control disrupted these networks. New trade routes were established, oriented toward Russia. Moscow and St. Petersburg became the economic centers, not the traditional cities of Central Asia. And the maps changed to reflect this. Trade routes that had been prominent on earlier maps became secondary. Russian railways and roads took priority. The cartography emphasized connection to Russia rather than traditional overland routes. Even the language changed. Maps started using Russian place names, Cyrillic, transliterations, Russian administrative terminology. The local names, the Persian and Turkic names that had been used for centuries, were replaced or relegated to parenthetical notations. Everything about the region's identity was systematically altered, on the maps and on the ground. By 1900, the transformation was complete. If you looked at a world atlas published in 1900, you wouldn't find Tartary. You'd find Turkestan, Mongolia, Manchuria, Siberia, all neatly divided between the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire. The maps showed railways connecting these territories to Moscow and Beijing, Russian administrative divisions, Chinese provinces, colonial infrastructure, no trace of the old name, no acknowledgement that this region had once been designated differently, that for 6 centuries, European cartographers had called it Tartary, and if you asked a geographer in 1900 why the name changed, they'd tell you it was a natural evolution. Improved knowledge of the region, better understanding of ethnic groups, more precise political boundaries. They'd say Tartary was just a vague term Europeans used when they didn't know much about Central Asia, and as knowledge improved, more specific names replaced it. But that explanation doesn't match the evidence. The 1851 Tallis map wasn't vague. It showed detailed information, specific boundaries, named cities, documented trade routes. The cartographers knew exactly what they were depicting. The change wasn't about improved knowledge. It was about political control, about erasing a name that represented independence and replacing it with names that represented imperial ownership. And it worked. Within 1 generation, the memory was gone. Tartary became a forgotten name, a historical curiosity, something that appeared on old maps but had no connection to modern geography. The erasure was so successful that even today, people who see the old maps assume they must be inaccurate, that Tartary must have been a mistake, a European invention. They don't realize they're seeing evidence of something that was deliberately removed, systematically erased, written out of cartographic history. I look at those 2 maps again, the 1851 Tallis map and the 1885 Colton map. Same territory, same mountains, same rivers, same cities, different name, different political identity, different understanding of what the region was and how it fit into the world. 34 years, 1 generation. That's all it took to erase 6 centuries of cartographic tradition. The question isn't why the name changed. The historical record is clear. Russian conquest replaced independent Tartary with Russian Turkestan. Chinese control maintained what had been called Chinese Tartary, but renamed it Mongolia and Manchuria. The question is, why the erasure had to be so complete? Why couldn't Russian Turkestan coexist with Tartary as a historical designation? Why did every reference to the old name have to be removed from new maps? Why did the cartographic establishment comply so quickly and so uniformly? Why didn't a single major cartographer resist the change, maintain the traditional name alongside the new political divisions? And why, when modern historians discuss the region, do they treat Tartary as if it were a European fantasy rather than a standard geographic designation used for 600 years? The maps are real. The evidence is clear. The name existed. And it was deliberately erased, not because geography changed, not because knowledge improved, but because the people who conquered the territory wanted to control how it was remembered. They controlled the land. They controlled the maps. And by controlling the maps, they controlled the memory of what the land had been before they arrived. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's documentary evidence. Map by map, year by year, name by name. The erasure of Tartary from cartography wasn't a correction. It was a conquest. And the maps are proof it happened.